Now, step 4, this is my favorite one. And it's so funny because when I'm working with students, they're always like, okay, but how much should I put here? And I'm like, that's really up to you. This is one place where I can advise you, but I can't do it for you. There's not a right answer for anyone. There's the answer that works best for you. So, what does that mean? So now you've gathered all of your data. You have all of your expenses on tab 1, you have your sales history at the bottom of tab 2, and you have your cash and bank history at the top of tab 2, right? So now we want to forecast how much we think we're going to make next year. Okay. So the way that we do that is we are going to do really three very simple things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to consider, do we have any additional staff coming on next year? So let's say you were a solopreneur all year this year, but you just hired your first employee, your first associate, and they're going to be taking their own weddings next year with whatever it is that you do. Your capacity is going to go up significantly, right? So you're going to want to add in additional revenue for the fact that you now have additional staff that can help bring in more revenue. You can sell more because of that, right? So you want to think about that. You also want to think about, did you raise your prices, right? So a lot of us do price increases in the fall. And so it's important to make sure that that price increase is reflected in your forecast, okay? And the last thing you want to think about is how much money is already on the books from weddings that you booked this year and payments that are forecasted to come in next year. This is really important to look at and not just slap a number on there. A lot of my students will say, oh, should I just grow by 10% next year or 20% next year? And I'm like, it's not that simple. You really need to be looking at all of these factors to forecast how much you think you're going to grow next year, and it may not be 10% across the board. It may be that some months you're going to grow a little and some months you're going to grow a lot just based on all of this data that you've collected. But this is the fun part, you guys. This is where you're taking control. Now, one pro tip that I'll tell you is that in my own budget, I have comments all over the place. So, you can right click and put a comment in the different cells. I tell myself why I forecasted that amount of money. So I'll go in and I'll say something like, we already had $7,000 on the books for payments coming in this month. Plus, I think we're going to sell 30,000 this month, which means we're going to take 10,000 in deposits, right? And retainers. And so I add that into, and then I think we raised prices by 20%. And so then I put a 20% growth marker on that. And so I want to tell myself what I was thinking when I came up with this number, because there's nothing worse than next year when you go to compare your budget to what you're actualizing and you're like, where did I come up with this number? I don't even know. So I always like to put those comments in to remind myself what I was thinking when I did my budget. So this is the fun part. I want you to go month by month and I want you to forecast what you think you're going to sell for next year. Okay. And the last piece of this budget, and this is really where you're going to go back to your expenses and you're going to see, okay, based on what I'm forecasting to do in income next year, how does that compare to my expenses? You want to make sure that your income is more than your expenses. Okay. Now, some months may be less, and that's okay because you have sales still to come in. And it's just the nature of business is that some months you're going to have more than what you need for your expenses. You're going to forecast more income, and some months you're going to forecast less. But here's where that's important. When you go into the year and you know that you have certain months that are less and certain months that are more, in those more months, instead of spending it and thinking like, oh my gosh, yeah, let's go out to dinner, let's take a trip, let's buy a new computer, you can save it because you see that you've got a month coming up that's going to be under. And so now instead of having these filet months and then ramen months, you flatten that out, which in the wedding industry is very difficult to do because we all have very high seasons and very low seasons. As a business owner with staff and paying yourself a salary, you really want to flatten that out. You want to make sure that every single month that you have the same amount of money to be able to pay all of your expenses. And so to be able to do that, you have to see all the months at a glance. So on the high months, you can store up like a squirrel, right? Storing up those acorns for those low months so that you can cover on those low months. And instead of having those low months where you don't know how you're going to pay your mortgage and you're eating ramen every night, you now have it flattened out because you knew those were coming. So there's no more of hoping and praying and wishing that you had enough money in the bank because now you can see it and it's all year long. You flattened it out, right? And this gives you that power to take over the finances of your business, to take control of how much you're going to sell in your business. And you guys, here's the amazing thing that comes with this. When you understand all of this, the residual effect is that you are so much more confident in your selling and your goals are so much more attainable because you can see them on paper. The number of students that I have worked with that have doubled their revenue simply because they took control of their finances and they understood how they needed to sell to hit their goal every single month instead of this massive annual goal. It makes it so much more attainable. They're so much more confident and they outsell what they ever thought that they could because of that confidence and that empowerment of taking back control of their finances.